Hello, Bio245. This is Vanessa, and we're here to talk more about the spinal cord. How fun is that? So, first on your list, we have these things talking about the plexuses. So, we're talking about the spinal cord in general. If you want to see a plexus on the spinal cord, you're going to have to look at a couple of different models that we have. First off is this one. You guys have seen this before from when we talked about our vertebrae. You can see here our cervical vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, and also our lumbar vertebrae. So, here, coming off the top, we have these guys. And there actually are two different kinds of plexuses coming out here joined into one. First off, you have your cervical plexus, which makes sense because it's coming out of the cervical vertebrae, right? So there you go. That top part of that nerve branch is going to be the cervical plexus. Okay? Hopefully you can see that. All right. Just underneath that, you have the next branch. And I know it looks like it's all one single branch, but this bottom branch here is actually its own branch. And this is the brachial plexus. Okay, so whenever you see plexus, it just means it's a bunch of nerves coming out and converging. Okay, so they're coming out of the spinal cord separately and they're converging with more epinurium and whatnot surrounding it. Next, we have the lumbar plexus. Now, unfortunately, you can't see it on this model, so at that point, you have to turn to another model. And I have a couple here I can show you. First, we have this guy. He's a heavy guy. All right. So this is our spinal cord exposed. So this is like if you cut the front of somebody off, hollowed them out, and then cut open their vertebrae. So this is the spinal cord inside. Okay. So here again we have the cervical region. So here's your cervical plexus. Here's your brachial plexus underneath of it. So the lumbar plexus, like you would imagine, comes out of the lumbar vertebrae. So thoracic vertebrae have the ribs coming out of them, right? So lumbar is going to be down here. So this plexus that you can see coming out right here, see that? That's going to be your lumbar plexus, okay? Lumbar plexus. Next on your list is the sacral plexus. The sacral plexus comes out of the inside of your sacrum. Because remember, we've cut this person open, we're looking inside. So their sacrum's down in here, and the sacral plexus is going to be coming out of the inside of your sacrum. And you can kind of see that it turns into this big nerve branch here, and you can actually see it on this model as well, but that sacral plexus is inside, coming out of the inside of the sacrum. The cauda equina comes out of the back, so in other words, you can't see it on here. You cannot see the cauda equina here. So cauda means tail, equina means horse, so it looks like a horsey tail. So I'll show you. If you turn this guy around, if you turn this guy around, there's your cauda equina going down the posterior side of your sacrum. Okay? All right. You'll also notice on your list that you have some enlargements and whatnot that you need to know about. So let's set this aside for a second, not get killed by it. Here we go again. So you have the cervical enlargement. So looking up. There you go. So into the cervical region once more. You will notice that as you look down the spinal cord, there's this slight enlargement here. It's a slight swelling as you go down the spinal cord. So there's your cervical enlargement. I think you can see that pretty well. So again, cervical enlargement. It becomes larger. It's just a swelling. You also have the lumbosacral enlargement, and it's the same ordeal. As you go work your way down the spinal cord, there's a section of it that gets large. So this swelling right here. So that is going to be your lumbosacral enlargement. Okay? So that's it for this part of the spinal cord. Next we got to look at the cross section of the spinal cord. Learn about that. So we looked at a little bit at the spinal cord before, but now we're going to learn all the different parts of it. Okay? And I'm just going to work my way down the list. So you guys should remember that gray matter that I pointed out already and the white matter that I pointed out already. Okay? All right. So on your list, it said underneath gray matter, it says posterior horns, anterior horns, and lateral horns. Typically, I would put in there like posterior gray horns, anterior gray horns, lateral gray horns, and normally I would also like to use dorsal and ventral. We took these terms directly out of your book. But if you would like to say posterior or dorsal horns, anterior or ventral horns, whatever you want to do, we'll accept both of those. But just keep in mind, if you hear me slip up and say dorsal or ventral, I'm still going down the list. It's just I'm used to saying dorsal and ventral. Okay? Okay, so for these great horns, remember we gotta orient ourselves to which way is dorsal and which way is ventral. So remember, we can look at the spine that points back, so dorsally or posteriorly, and then here's our ventral or anterior side, right? The body of that vertebrae. Okay. All right. So that means that this is our posterior horn, this is our anterior horn, this is our lateral horn, and it's as simple as that. Moving into the white matter, you have these things called a funiculus. So the funiculus is, you might also hear it referred to as a column. But anyway, same ordeal here. So this portion of the white matter is the anterior funiculus. This portion here is the lateral funiculus. This is your posterior funiculus. So there you go for that. That's pretty easy, right? So as long as you know which way is anterior and which way is posterior, you're good to go. Moving on down, we have the posterior and anterior root. The root comes directly out of the spinal cord. So if you look here, here's our ventral side. So here's our ventral root. And again, it's coming directly out of the spinal cord. If you look on the dorsal or the posterior side, there's that root coming directly out of the spinal cord. So that's going to be your posterior or dorsal root. Okay. Moving on down here, we have our ganglion. So remember what that ganglion is going to be a swelling. So on this side, you can see it really well. So there is the swelling right there on the posterior side. So your posterior root, if you follow it along, just like so, maybe it's easier to see with my probe, you'll see it leads into the dorsal or posterior root ganglion. You'll often hear me call it the dorsal root ganglion. But that's another way that you can know whether we're dorsal or ventral. The dorsal root will always be on the dorsal side, whereas here's that ventral guy right there. So our dorsal root ganglion will be on the dorsal side. Ventral nerve or ventral root will be on the ventral side. Okay, that's another great way to know. Okay, moving on, we have something called the central canal. Now, if you look up close here in the very center of our spinal cord, where I'm poking my probe inside of, that is our central canal. And that's just a continuation of our ventricles from the brain that we talked about before, down the center, filled with that cerebrospinal fluid that we were talking about. Okay. Moving on here, we have the ramus and also the spinal nerve. So for the ramus and the spinal nerve, first off, so you can see here, there's that dorsal root and our ventral root. Where they come together for a short period of time and they're wrapped in the same connective tissue, that is the spinal nerve. When we have the exiting away from the spinal nerve, that's going to be the ramus. Okay, so in this case, this is our dorsal or posterior side. So here's our dorsal or posterior ramus. Here's our ventral or anterior ramus. Okay, so just after that branching point. Oh, actually, it's over here. That's my bad. Here's that branching point. I can't see from where I am, but this branching point right here. So this whole thing is your spinal nerve, and there's the branch. My bad, right there. Okay, so posterior, anterior, and you can see that here as well. I used to have those sticky notes on there, but anterior, posterior. Okay, and moving on, we could talk about the meninges real quick, and then we'll be all done. So we talked about the brain and the meninges before, and how we had the pia mater, which was soft on the inside, the dura mater, which is hard all the way on the outside, and then we have all these gaps and spaces and stuff. So I'm going to show you that right now. So here's your spinal cord, hugging it super tight. That is going to be our pia mater. Pia means soft, and mater means mother. So she's the soft mother that hugs super, super tight onto the spinal cord. So she's just right there, like saran wrap, okay? The next one, you can kind of see, there you go. So that next layer right there, this white guy exactly where my probe is poking, that is going to be the arachnoid mater. So arachnoid obviously means spider, mater means mother. Moving on, we have the dura mater. So that's exactly where my probe is pointing. Dura means hard, mater means mother. She's the hard mother. So she's on the outside protecting everybody, okay? Now you'll notice that there's spaces as well. Whenever we name a space, it's usually sub, okay? So sub always means underneath. So for example, here's our dura mater that we talked about. The subdural space is this small gap just beneath it. So this tan line, that is going to be your subdural space. Here's our arachnoid mater, so underneath there, that's going to be our subarachnoid mater. And that's actually where the arachnoid mater got their name, is from the subarachnoid space, because it looks like it's filled with spider webs. Above the dura mater, we have something a little bit different. We actually have the epidural space, which probably will sound familiar if you guys are familiar with women who get like C-sections or whatnot. They get administered an epidural shot, so they get injected in this space. Caveat with this, we do not have an epidural space around the brain, only around the spinal cord. Okay? Okay. Well, that covers everything, so that is our spinal cord, and just to remind you, since I kind of flubbed and messed up a little bit, there's our roots of our nerve, our dorsal or posterior ganglion, there is the spinal nerve, and then they split to be the ramus, so just to clarify in case you guys were confused by me. But anyway, there you go, that's the video. Hope you have a great day.